Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Bob Mover, and this is our podcast on the real side. And today, I have a wonderful, unusual type of guest in some respects. We've generally always had people that are active musicians, active players, and today we have someone who certainly has as much activity in the world of jazz as most players have. And I kind of consider him, and he also has had a lot of activity in the music business, which we'll get into besides the business of music. And, he has been in it from the professional end, but also I kind of think of him as maybe, kind of like the ultimate jazz aficionado, the ultimate jazz lover and fan. So I thought it would be interesting to talk to him, as I've always enjoyed his company, and he's got some wonderful experiences and stories of his life in the jazz world. His name is Jean-Michel Reisser, and the reason I hesitate in saying his whole name is that in the world of jazz, he is known consistently as Beethoven. How he came to be, how he came by that appellation, and everything we'll get to, among other things. But let's say hello to Jean-Michel Reisser, who I'm going to talk to as Beethoven, which is how we've talked. So I'd like you all to meet Beethoven. Hello, Beethoven.
Hello, Bob. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. And I should
Oh man,
mention,
it's a pleasure to talk with you. It's a long time. You see?
yeah, we have a little history together, which actually we'll talk about it in a minute. But we met in Tel Aviv, Israel, in 1992
That's
during what was
right.
called the Super Jazz Festival, which was
Yeah,
super in the sense that not all of us got paid. Uh,
yeah.
and you you helped me get my money. I remember that. That was kind of how we
That's
met. And at that time, Beethoven was managing Ray Brown, and I was
yeah.
brought uh, to play a concert, a tribute to Charlie Parker in Tel Aviv. I also did some master classes, but my main event, so to speak, the main reason I was there was that our mutual friend Francis Paudras, the late
Right.
Francis Paudras,
Yeah.
had organized, been a great part of the organization of the
Mhm.
festival. He did not organize the money part. I mean, he organized what we were supposed to get paid, but he had nothing to do with running away. That was a whole other story. But the thing is that I was there for the honor of playing a tribute to Charlie Parker with people that had played with Bird. I had the great Walter Bishop on piano and Ray Brown on bass, which was also one of the main reasons that Beethoven was there. And Roy Haynes was scheduled to play drums, but he had some political. He kind of, as I was told, he kind of had some political. Well, for some reason, he didn't want to play in Israel at that time,
That's right.
and I don't really know his politics, so I can't say. But a very fine at the last minute, this French drummer who's still around, a very fine drummer named Philippe Soirat,
Yeah.
uh, was recruited to play with us. And you were were you the one that asked him to do it, Beethoven? That he was
Yeah.
the
You
French
know,
group, right?
yeah. So Roy Haynes was supposed to do it, but for some reasons I still don't know, he didn't do it. So who is gonna play? And we had this young cat who played, at the festival, but off the festival. And I said, I hear this guy because we went there for a couple of days before the
Right,
main, you know, and I hang out and I heard this drummer, and Ray was with me with Pierre Boussaguet, the great French bass player. And we
right.
were the three of them, and we said, this guy is a good drummer. And I said to Francis, I said, listen, uh, Philippe is a very good drummer as far as we hear, And he says, yes, he's a good drummer. So I asked Ray, I said, what do you think about it? He said, I think he's all right. And when Ray says that, this is good, you know. And this is how he came on stage and played with you guys, you know.
Yeah, and he was really, surprised and thrilled. In the last minute, he was like, "Oh man, I can't hope I can do it." Oh, I say he'll be fine, and
Yeah.
and he was very nice, and we have a recording of it that actually he recorded, and we're talking about
Yeah.
trying to get it released, which brings me to like other things that Beethoven has done. Let me just give you a certain career rundown in a nutshell of a kind of a biography, which we've kind of assembled just to give you an idea of his actual involvement in the music. Well, for one thing, he's been involved. He was a musical director. You were a musical director of the Geneva Jazz Festival from 1988 to 96.
Yeah.
And you had a jazz shop in Geneva called Jazzomania for 15 years in Geneva, Switzerland.
Right.
You also did a whole bunch of films. You were involved in a lot of documentaries in collaboration with the club New Morning,
That's
which
right.
is a club that's in France and Switzerland. And they were kind of a franchised in a certain way. The same family really had them, but Madame Fari, I loved her. She was great. And
Yeah.
New Morning, and he did that for a channel in Europe called Muzzik, which is now called Mezzo
That's
today.
right. Yeah.
And so you did over 100 documentaries, which was sort of like jazz casual, where they would have a group and they would feature one group. And how long were these? Were they like 45 minutes or an hour? They were short
Yeah.
documentaries, right?
That my idea was, I knew the one of the son of my Madame Fari was Daniel Fari. Daniel Fari was a great guy, but he was involved into to film many documentaries for La Croix Rouge, but he was a huge jazz fan. And one day he came to see me, and he said, "Mr. Reiser," I didn't know him. He said, "Mr. Reiser, I want you. We can do something together." And I said, "I don't know what he wants." So we talk, and he said, "I film. I think I have some good stuff in filming, and I have a good knowledge, and so I want to do some film, some documentaries. So I can film. You bought the musicians, and that's how it happened. You know. So what we did two things. Two things. I said, okay. I said, we film the concerts, but I told him, I said, listen, to film concerts, everybody can do this. We have to do something different. So I said to him, I said, let me talk to the musicians. So I called to a lot of musicians and I said, listen, I have maybe this opportunity to do that. Are you okay if you come to Europe to film one night concert and to be with you for 2 days and to do a documentary? So we did two things. One thing was a concert at the New Morning, and for 2 days we were around the musicians and we filmed them at the airport, in the hotel room, and doing some shopping. And we did about those documentaries. I told him, I said, they should be not that long. So that was between 45 minutes, 48 minutes, you know. So we were around the musicians and we did some interviews into the documentaries, and they
Right.
talk about what they think about traveling, the business arrangements, all that stuff. And at the end, people, they love it because they say, we are with the musicians, we are just nearby the musicians, and the musicians are our friends. So that was a good success because Mezzo and Muzzik, they asked us to do a. So we started with 5, and I think we did about 80.
Well, people
So that
enjoy,
was
that
that was
kind
a
of
huge
that
success.
kind of inside the scenes kind of intimacy with the musicians. Even if you don't hear the whole tune, you get enough of the music to get the flavor of it. Who were some of the musicians that you used in these films?
Oh man, we had Clark Terry, Bob Berg, Randy Brecker. Ray Brown, Roy Hargrove, Art Farmer, Christian McBride. Oh man,
So
oof,
this was all later.
Roy
This was all. This
Roy
was in the
Ayers.
'90s. When what was this in the in the '90s, around the '90s and early 2000s?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we did that for 1994 to 2009, I think. 15
Oh.
years. Yeah. So that was great because the musicians, they love it. And I didn't have any problem because they trust me. And most of the musicians at the end, they said, Mr. Reiser or Beethoven, they said, man, you are the only guy who do that because, you know, in the States, nobody asked us to do that. So that was great, So our ID worked, you
Well,
know.
as usual in the States, nobody wanted anything of that because they prefer, America's Got Talent, uh, and the
Yeah, yeah,
American
yeah,
Idol.
yeah, yeah.
Like my daughter, there was a thing Canadian Idol, and she was living. My oldest daughter Emily is a wonderful singer songwriter, and just for as a lark, 20 years or so ago or so, she uh, just auditioned for that. And one of the judges said in the thing, she didn't appear on it, but it was like, "Oh yeah, you're a jazz singer. You're singing with that breathy sound. That's usual," And he was putting her down like this, and she was like thinking. And one of these guys was black, and she said to him, "I really don't care because who likes my singing? Hank Jones." And I bet you don't even know. And I bet you don't even know who Hank Jones is. And
Yeah.
she's like, but that's like typical America, or North America. Where in Europe, I mean, Charlie Mariano, I just saw a documentary about him, and he said that he had to go to Europe because he said he just couldn't really work. He could have taught at Berkeley and spent his life teaching, but to actually have a playing career, he had to go to Cologne or go to Europe. And even Phil Woods, up until his Billy Joel record, when Phil was in New York, because I knew Phil, I was studying with him at the time. He decided to move to Europe. Uh, he moved to France because he was doing a lot of studio work in New York, but he couldn't get steady gigs as a band leader or as a jazz musician, um, except occasionally the half note in the local clubs in New York. But for Phil to put a tour together and go across the United States, that slot was already, there's only so many slots. That's what Paul Bley told me once. And the slot for a touring alto saxophonist at that time was taken up by Cannonball. And there
Yeah.
wasn't room for two. So you didn't see Jackie McLean touring. You didn't see
No.
Philly touring. You didn't really see Art Pepper touring. These guys were pretty much staying in their local areas. But when Phil moved to Europe, he said to me, he said, "Bobby, I've got a career. I'm actually playing jazz all the time, leading a band and going all over the place." And so thank God for the Europeans, because otherwise jazz would have literally died, I think, without you guys.
A
And
lot of people, a lot of musicians came to Europe. Herb Geller, another great one that I work with. Herb Geller, I think he came
wonderful
to
alto
Europe.
player.
Oh, it was great, great, great one. He arrived at 1960 and he died there. I mean, and Dexter Gordon, Kenny Drew, Ed Thigpen, you name a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean that was the kind of thing I almost moved to Europe, but I have a daughter who was growing up in America, so I didn't want to be away too far, and I wasn't with her mother, so her mother wasn't about to move to Europe, without us having a marriage. But anyway, it was I certainly went over there enough. I think in 15 years I made like 70 something trips to Europe, so I go probably
Good.
once a season, at least 4 or 5 times a year. But let's get back to you though. I mean, also you spent some time in America because I think largely due to your association with Ray and we'll get into that in a minute. Ray and Sweets and some of these people you knew who were on the LA scene, right? You spent some time in LA. How long did you spend there, and what was your kind of involvement there?
Well, I spent a lot in New York, you know. and I spent a lot in LA. I think I spend much more time in LA than in New York because that was like it is. Sweets, Ray Brown, Lalo Schifrin, Benny Carter, Plas Johnson, another great guy that I love, a great, great, great musician, and Henry Mancini. I knew him, Neil Hefti. I knew all those guys, so I was a great friend of them. And they all the time they say, "Hey, just come to say hello." And I came for 1 month, and that was difficult because everybody wants to see me and having me for 5 days. So I had many troubles because they call and they say, "Okay, I want you to come to my house," and I didn't have enough time, to that was funny, but that was great. I had great, great time, with all those guys, all those people. That was fabulous, fabulous.
Yeah, and
And
then
on
you
top of
became actually producing some videos for Ray Brown, including his teaching video,
That's right.
and
Yeah, yeah.
Herb
He
Ellis
had
and
he had
Monty
he had a
Alexander.
club. He had a club in Santa Monica for a couple of years at the end of the 80s, and he filmed a couple of stuff. And he filmed this, and I said maybe we can do that together. And so he did 3 teaching videos, and he did one live album, one live video with the Triple Treat with Monty Alexander and Herbie Ellis.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. And now the club was the Lower Club, it was called.
That's right. That's right. The Lower Club at the Santa Monica. But Ray, that was Ray's club, but he didn't stay that long because he couldn't have the alcohol license. Can you believe it? Ray Brown, who knew everybody, who was one of the big boss in LA about music and business, he couldn't have an alcohol license. So that's
Alcohol
why
license.
alcohol, yeah. So he said, "Okay, I have to close because I
Why
lose
did
money."
why wouldn't they grant him an alcohol license? I'm just curious. What was the reason?
He
Was
didn't
there?
tell me. He didn't tell me, but he was really very he was very he didn't understand that, and nobody, because he was in the business. Everybody knew him. So sometimes everybody, nothing happens, and sometimes you don't know anybody and things happen. You don't know.
That's true. I mean, well,
Yeah.
getting back to, let's talk a little bit about your background, how you got into it, and how you happen to know all these people.
Yeah.
You were, as Barry Harris might say, born into this music. Um,
Yeah.
your father, as your nickname Beethoven, your father was known by some of the older musicians as Charles Boyer.
Oh yeah, that's right. The same
For
musician. Yeah.
for our
Yeah.
younger viewers who may not know who Charles Boyer was, Charles Boyer was a French actor who was in quite a few American films. The most famous of them, I believe, being Gaslight, which was with Ingrid Bergman about a husband, and they use that expression now to gaslight someone is to make you think that you're crazy through manipulation
Yeah.
and this kind of thing. And he was, but the thing was that Charles Boyer was a synonym for sophistication. Charles
That's
Boyer
right.
was just a very internationally sophisticated personality, and he generally that was the person he played in the movies. And so
That's
your father was nicknamed Charles Boyer. His name was
Yeah.
what, Frederic, actually, or what was his first name really? Your dad?
His first name was Michel.
Oh, Michel, and that's your uh, your middle name,
Yeah, that's right.
Michel.
You know, my father, was many, many, many years ago, and he was always dressed to the nines. My father, he was tough and he was tall. He was looking like Clark Gable,
Right,
but
or
he
Charles
was,
Boyer.
yeah,
Same
like
type.
Charles Boyer, and he was talking to the woman. He was very successful, and he said, "My lady, so and so and so," and suddenly Swets Edison and Ray said, "Hey, he he talks and he looks like Charles Boyer." So it started like that. So everybody knew him as Charles Boyer, but I tell you, they gave him that nickname 50 years ago. It's a long time ago.
But were your parents separated, or did they stay together?
My parents know, but my mother died. She was very young. My mother died. She was 37 years old.
Oh, I'm
Can you
sorry to hear
believe it?
that.
So she died very, very young. And
Ah,
my father didn't remarry. So so that was like that.
sorry to
But
hear that.
I had two parents. My two parents. I was listening to jazz before I was born. You know, my parents were crazy about jazz. They had a big collection, but they listened to jazz first. Then they listened to classical music. They love Brazilian music, Cuban music, French music, but the good French music, all the
There is
singers,
some.
Jean Sablon, Charles Trenet, and all those guys, you know. And so I was surrounded by very good music, but especially jazz.
Were you an only
And
child?
no, I have a brother who is actually 5 years younger than me. He likes jazz, but doesn't he's not that crazy, but he likes jazz. He likes it. But he's not like me.
Now, you told me,
So
I remember my first trip to Europe was with Chet Baker in 1975 when I was 23.
I
And you
saw
said
I
you had
saw
heard
you
me
at
there.
Nice. Yeah,
And now, was your brother with your father? Did he take the two of you to the jazz festivals, or
yeah, sure. Yeah,
so
yeah.
so you were running around the jazz festivals with your dad from the time you
And
were
my
very
mom,
small?
and my mom too. My mom died in 1979. So we were in Nice many times, Montreux, all around. We went there for 10 days, and we spent days with musicians and we talk and we already knew many musicians, because my first concert was my parents and I. We went to Juan-les-Pins, south of France,
Right, Joan Le
and
Pen, right near
yeah,
Nice.
and nearby Nice, and we were walking nearby the sea, and suddenly my parents saw a big poster, "Tonight Count Basie," and my father said to my mother, "Let's go." But my mother said, "What about Jean-Michel?" He says, "No problem. He comes with us." And my mother said yes. So I was listening to the band. I was up in the seat, and I was directing like Count Basie, already. So the concert finished at midnight, and I was still up. I was excited, and my parents said, "Okay, let's go backstage, say hello." So we arrived backstage, and of course, when you have a kid of 3 years old, I was a star. Everybody said, "Hey, how are you?" And they kissed me, and Freddie Green, and back this for this store, Joe Davis was there, and Sweets was there. That's how I met them there.
Sweet, by the way, is Harry Edison. For those of
Yeah,
you who don't
Sweets
know,
Edison. Yeah,
which they used to call him Harry One Note Edison because he could play one note and
and
send you home at a jam session.
that,
He was famous for his economy, and he's from the
that's
original Count Basie band.
that's
You hear him from the 1938 Count Basie band with Lester Young and Joe Jones and Walter Page, the original Basie band, and stayed with him for a long time. Also, you hear Sweets, just to clarify this for people, on a lot of Frank Sinatra records. You
right.
can hear him playing little solos in the middle, getting these little 4-bar things or little backgrounds, obligatos behind Frank. When you hear a muted trumpet, it's usually Sweets. And
Yeah,
he was an incredibly uh,
he
unique
was
player,
unique master.
master. And there's beautiful records. I think it's "Laughing to Keep from Crying" with Prez, toward the late
That's
Lester
right.
Young records and things like that.
Yeah.
And he was a rather acerbic personality. How
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh
tell
yeah.
us a little? Tell us a little about I saw him in action a little bit, and it was pretty funny. But can you tell me something about Sweets?
So I'm gonna finish my story with Bassie. So I saw Sweets and Lockjaw. They kissed me, and suddenly he came Count Bassie. And when he was saw me, he took me and he said, "Oh, the baby," and he kissed me and he asked my parents. He said, can he come with me? Come with me in my room. So he gave me some, something to eat, something to drink, and that's how it happened. And he loved me. I love everybody. And they said, okay. My parents said, when are you coming back to Europe next year? And and every year I saw all those musicians: Ella, Errol Garner, Oscar, Monk, Dizzy, Elvin Jones, Art Blakey. I saw all of them, and Duke too. And every year, we went to see them. So they remember us, and we became friends and close friends. That's what's happened. And we never asked anything to the musicians. We were there to say hello, and we came with all the LPs, and we talk about their music, and I think they were impressed because we were very honest. We loved, that was our living, life, and that's why I think they love us.
Now, how did you get the name? How did you happen upon to getting the name Beethoven?
Oh, that was about 40 years ago now, 45 years ago. I was helping a tour with Ray Brown, and Pierre Boussaguet was there. Sweets was there too, and we were arriving nearby Basel. There is another city called Rheinfelden. This is just nearby Basel, and we were at this hotel, and we were arriving, and there was nobody at the desk. So we were waiting at the desk, and during our waiting, there is a big picture of Beethoven looking like this. And I was looking, many times I said, oh, can you see? And I was looking like that. And, Boussaguet, Pierre Boussaguet, whose name was Charles de Gaulle, given by Swets Edison. That's another story maybe that I can tell. So Charles de Gaulle as the great Pierre Boussaguet, for me, is the best bass player in Europe for 40 years now. So Pierre Boussaguet, Ray, and Sweets. And suddenly Sweets look at me and said, can you see? He looks like Jean-Michel, that motherfucker. Sweets, he was spelling like me. He's looking like, and everybody's looking at me and said, yeah, you look like Beethoven. So that's how it started, Beethoven. And I was not happy about that because I said, no, I'm not Beethoven, I'm Jean-Michel. And Ray said to me, he said, listen, this name, everybody knows this name all around the world. So if you call us everywhere Jean-Michel Reisser, how do you spell it? Nobody's going to understand anything. If you say to somebody, Beethoven has called, everybody remembers. And that's right, So that's how it happened.
Ray was not just a musical genius; he was a business genius.
Oh yeah.
That's exactly public relations genius.
Yeah, and sooner or later, everybody, all the musicians, Benny Carter and J.J. Johnson and Hank Jones and, all the guys from Kenny Clark, everybody, they all said Beethoven at him. So sooner or later, many musicians, if you said Jean-Michel Reisser, everybody said, who? And if you said, this is Beethoven, oh, I know it. So that was the great publicity, for me.
But now, didn't you have an incident with the Swiss post office about getting letters under the name? They wanted to find out. What's that story? Told me that.
Oh, yeah. So with the months and the year, the 1 year, the first year, so I received a lot of letters and packages. And in those days, that was the beginning of the fax, the fax machines. So that was very expensive. So I couldn't buy a fax machine. But the Lausanne post office had about 25 faxes, and every time we can have faxes through them. They call you and they said, Mr. Reisser, you have faxes for you. So I went there, and of course, many musicians, they send me Beethoven and my number. And one day I received a big letter from the post office, Swiss post office in Lausanne. Mr. Reiser, you have to go there at this time. This is very urgent. This is very important. So I said, what did I do? So I arrived there, and there was the big chief. I knew after that. There is the biggest chief of the post office in Switzerland. Were there, and he said, Mr. Reiser, sit down. I sat down. I said, what's happened? So I was like this because I said, what did I do? And he said, it took a long time to know that why you have this name Beethoven. Your name is Jean-Michel Reisser, not Beethoven. So I tried to talk to him, that when musicians, they love you, they give you a nickname sooner or later, especially the Black African people, You have Fats Waller, you have, So, and I tried to explain him, but he looked at me, African American, and he looked at me, and I understood that he didn't understand. He said, I think he was hearing me, but he didn't understand anything because he couldn't imagine that because in Switzerland, that's very restrictive thing. We don't have that.
Yeah.
And at the end, I said, sir, that's all I can tell you. He said, okay. Let's see what we can do. And when I was upon to leave, he just said, Mr. Reiser, come back. And I said, okay, sit down. So I sat down, and he said, okay. He said, if you can prove us after 5 years that your nickname is as known or better known as your regular name, we can do something for you. We can put your name, this Beethoven, with Jean-Michel Reisser. And you know what I told him? And I said, it can't be 5 years. It's now, because you asked me to come and to explain you that. So it was like that. So I say, hey, no, I don't want to 5 years. It's now. It's on.
Yeah, and it's already been.
It's already been. And the guy said, okay. And 4 days after, I received a letter and said, Mr. Reiser, I have it there. Mr. Reiser, you are registered as Beethoven. Can you believe it? I think I was the only guy in Switzerland.
Yeah, I think that's funny. I mean, that's funny because the Swiss can be like that, so attentive to those little things. I think in the States, I mean, unless your name was maybe Vladimir Putin or Adolf Hitler or something, just the address is what matters. It doesn't matter who, I mean, Mr. Magoo, I mean, you can send it to anybody. The name is not so as important as long as the zip code is there. But, I find that so funny about Switzerland. I love Switzerland that people are very, very hip or incredibly square. There's very little in the middle there, I mean, it's
so
funny.
I have a story for you about Swets Edison, and I have a story that he told me, and some musicians at this session were there, and they told me that too. You said that Swets was for a long time a regular with Frank Sinatra. He was Frank's special guest every time.
Yeah.
Sinatra loved so much Swets that he said, you come every time you want, you play everything you want. So he had a seat, and he came every time he wanted, and he played every note he wanted. Can you believe it? That was the only musician that Frank did it for, So that was during the session of the Song for the Swinging Lovers. So I can't remember the title, but they played one tune, and after the tune, they went to the control booth and they listened to the tune. And Sweets how he played. He said, so he was playing like this, behind Frank. And after the
mute.
Yeah, with the mute,
Yeah.
And at the end, Frank looked at Sweets and he said, hey, Sweets, I think you play a little bit too nasty on that one. And you know what he said? Frank, you sing, I'm playing the fucking trumpet in front of the whole orchestra. Can you believe it?
Oh, I could see
Saying
him that
that
way.
to Sinatra, and he did. And Sinatra shut up, and he didn't say anything. You said, Frank, you sing, I'm playing the fucking trumpet. True story.
I had breakfast with him one day in Nice that summer that you were there. My very first time in Europe. I found myself at breakfast one morning with Michael Moore, the bass player, but also George Duvivier, Sweets, Joe Newman, and his wife Rigmore.
Yeah.
And Sweets was not very. He was having a little trouble with her, and he expressed that.
Yeah.
Let's just say he was expressing that pretty clearly, to the point where I was scared to death of him after that. He frightened me. I said, wow, he was so scathing. And then he said he was talking to Joe like that too, you know, because Joe started to defend his wife, and then Sweets wasn't having that either. And I said, whoa, you know, so I remember that. I mean, those guys are extremely direct. I have a story from that festival too that I may have told to somebody else, but this was my first time at a festival in Europe. I was 23.
Europe. Yeah.
And you know, the very first gig, first concert we played, the trumpets were Chet Baker, Joe Newman, and Clark Terry. The saxophone players were Lockjaw, Eddie Lockjaw Davis.
Lockjaw, I remember Lockjaw. Yes, he was there. Yeah.
Yeah, Zoot Sims and me. And the rhythm section was Kenny Drew, Larry Ridley, and David Lee from Sonny Rollins' band.
Okay.
And those, I don't think Sonny was there that one, but David and Larry Ridley were there just as playing with different groups. Anyway, after the concert, Jaws took me aside and gave me a wonderful compliment and said, "Man, you were as good as anybody up there tonight. You know, welcome to you know, to the world." And you know, it was really just very, very kind and sweet and nice. So now these concerts, different nights, you were with different bands, and there were all kinds of, you know, things. It was a George Wein thing, which was really like these giant jam sessions. Well, everything was sort of a little bit like Norman Granz, like George Wein produced, like, you know, these people that might not normally play together, and you know, you wouldn't normally hear Chet Baker and Lockjaw together, you know, this kind of thing. And they were all outdoors in this outdoor amphitheater, right? So there was a bar, couple hundred yards from the stage, and you'd be sitting there in the bar. There'd be different cats sitting around the outdoor bar, and they'd be listening to whatever was playing. So we finished a concert, and Lockjaw wasn't playing this one; he was just listening. And Chet and I had been to the beach that day. Maurice Coulaz.
Maurice. Oh, yeah.
And Yvonne, his wife, were the head of the French radio, jazz radio. Wonderful person. Right. That they had a party, and they would have these parties in Antibes, actually, because Juan Le Pen was happening the same time as the festival in Nice. And anyway, we went to this party, and there are those African guys that sell those kind of Crocodile Dundee type hats. You know, they're cowboy style hats. And Chet and I had bought those hats together. They were just these pink hats. And that night I had the hat on, and Chuck Mangione was popular at this time. He had that song "Feel So Good," and you know, was very popular on the jazz radio in the States, or even on commercial radio. But anyway, I get off the bandstand and I see Jaws sitting there drinking his scotch and milk, and I say, "Hey, Jaws, how you doing?" And then he had these huge hands, and he smacks me in the head and knocks my hat off. And he said, "You don't need no fucking hat. You know, you can play. You don't need no gimmicks. You don't need no gimmicks, because you know, next time I see you in that hat, I'm gonna knock more than the hat off." And he was, you know, it was funny, you know, you don't need no gimmicks. And so he was that. So now you also got to know, I mean, you got to know Count Basie kind of as you got older.
Yeah, I first met him, you know, the first concert, I was 3 years old, and every year I saw him, and we we became close friends, and invite me to his house in New York, but I couldn't go, and he died after that. But we spent many days with him. He came to Lausanne. He came one time to our home in Porrentruy, where my parents used to live, and he was a very nice guy. He was a very quiet guy, but he was a, how can I say, he was a, in French, pince sans rire. You thought that was wrong, but that was right, and something you thought that was right and was wrong, and at the end he was laughing. He was and very, very clever. I remember one time I was with him, and we talk about life and problems in life, and divorce, and losing people. And he said, and we talk about jazz, and he said, jazz music is not only a music style. This is a lifestyle.
It is not what was the word? Jazz music is not
He said jazz is not only a music style. This is a lifestyle.
lifestyle. Yeah,
You,
that's you can
you
see.
know,
There's a wonderful quote attributed to Lester Young about jazz. He said, "Jazz is an art, a science, and a philosophy." He
that's right.
supposedly told the drummer Willie Jones that it's an
Oh
art, a
yeah,
science, and a philosophy. And
yeah. And I remember a couple of young pianists went to see Bassie Bill, and they asked him a lot of stuff. Why do you play this, and how do you play that? And I remember one time Bill said to them, he said, "What I play today, um, it's 50 years of learning, but not only learning music, but this is learning life." He said, "Listen, you have to go through a lot of troubles then to play this music and to be able to play the truth of this music." As he said. He said, technique is technique, but he said, jazz is the very true stuff of life. So you have to go through a lot of problems. Then you play, you change your playing, you change the way that you play, and then it's happening like it happens. But he said to the young musicians, he said, no, technique, no way. You have to express yourself, but you express yourself the deepest way. You have to live your life. He said.
that's a beautiful thing. And I heard it expressed by Ira Sullivan in a very similar fashion. That Ira told somebody one night that jazz is real life music, in the sense that if you look at your life, what are we doing? We're improvising on a structure. Every day we have a structure. We have something. Okay, I've got to
Yeah,
wake up. I've got to feed my dog. I've got to, have breakfast. I've got to go meet so and so at 12:30, and I have to make a
that's
phone
right.
call at 2, and I have to do this. But then all of a sudden something happens, because life is constantly in motion. So all of a sudden your plans have to
That's
be
right.
altered. And so what do? You improvise. So you've got a tune, and it has a structure, and it has chord changes, and you try to stay within the structure of what you've done, but you can't plan it out because you don't know what's going to happen in it. And the fact
That's
that
right.
and I think that's a real essence of the music. Now you yourself, I'm not surprised, but I know that you also, unlike a lot of jazz critics and jazz music business people, you played the bass for quite a while, and you played some piano, and
Yeah,
I was never a
my
professional,
my
but
my father used to play. First of all, he used to play not professionally. He tried to play the clarinet, but it was difficult. So he played the bass, and he played in a local band. So he played the bass. So he tried to teach me to play a little bit bass. And I have a couple of pictures. And when Ray was one time in my house, he saw that, and he signed downstairs, down the picture. He said hello, and he signed it because he couldn't believe it that I was playing a little bit the bass. And I played the piano for 10 years, but I was I play classical music. I was not good, but it was enough for me to know exactly what's happening in the music, the chord changes and the problems and everything. So I know what's going on, and that's for me the main thing. I was not a very good pianist, but I can't read. I know what's going on, and it helps.
Yeah, well, I mean, also, I mean, among other things, I mean, you've produced a whole bunch of records. And, you know, as we look, as Jesse mentioned earlier, when, our producer, Jesse Kaiser, was looking at them and she said, you know, there's an awful lot of LPs behind you there on those shelves.
Yeah.
And you must have quite an extensive collection of, you know, LPs, CDs, and various even books and things. What kind of collection, like how large is your collection? And, you know, I mean, you must have a whole bunch of things. I mean,
Yeah. So I have my father and my mother used to buy a lot of LPs, and since my first LPs, I bought them when I was 4 years old. The four first LPs were an LP Charlie Parker plays strings, Errol Garner, Count Basie, and Louis Armstrong. That was my four first LPs that I bought myself with my parents, but I bought myself when I was 4 years old.
Errol Garner was the Concert by the Sea. Everybody bought that record.
No, that was an album, Errol
They
Garner,
had it
that was
already.
on
I'm sure your parents had
CBS.
that.
That was one of his best to me. He did an album for CBS and on this album, he plays Caravan. Wow.
Uh-huh.
Jeez, Caravan. That on that album, that's a monster. Yeah.
So you
So
have
and
about,
I got to meet him too, and he was a very clever man too. And
what was he
he
like?
he knew Errol Garner. He knew a lot of stuff. You can talk cooking. You can talk about cars. You can talk. He knew a lot of different stuff. He was very clever and he was very curious.
I saw him interviewed once, actually, on the old Mike Douglas show in the States, and he mentioned that he had never had a cup of coffee. He said he had never, it just had never occurred to him to drink coffee, and for some
Yeah,
reason he didn't want to do it. And I thought that was funny. You know, I mean, Hank Jones told me once too. We were talking
yeah,
about one of the reasons he didn't join Charlie Parker and that kind of thing, and he preferred to stay at CBS and play in the orchestra and then play gigs at night in New York. He had never smoked a cigarette, had a drink
no.
of alcohol,
Oh
smoked a
no.
joint, or done anything.
I
And
have story for you. I have a story for you with
well,
Hank Jones.
my thing with Hank, you know, I said that's amazing. I said that's very curious. He said, well, I had a good reason for that. I say, why? He said, well, I'm such an extreme person that had I even begun to do those things, I would have been the worst of everybody.
So the first tour that I did with him, oh, that was a long time ago. And I went to his room. I asked him for something, and in every room that he went, the first thing that he took his luggage, one of his luggage, he opened one of his luggage, and he took one of his stuff. How can you say that? So, and he
Right.
was he was he was under the bed, on the bed. He was everywhere. He was. Oh man, he had all this stuff. You know, yeah, he had over 6, 7 different stuff that for the bed. That was another one. For the toilet, that was another one. He was like that. He was
Well,
like
you
that.
know, they talk about obsessive compulsive disorder these days, OCD, and I was thinking a
Yeah,
lot about that because one of my daughters, my middle daughter, my 17-year-old, has sort of been diagnosed with this OCD. She'll spend a lot of time trying to get something right, and she's late to
yeah,
school because of it. And I was thinking about that, and I said, well, you know, a lot of the very brilliant people I've known had a kind of OCD. I mean, that was certainly if you
yeah,
saw Hank doing that, and I know he was like that with the all that detail. But then you
Yeah,
see that same thing that would spray that stuff with room freshener everywhere was the kind of thing that would enable him, when practicing, to go over the same minute detail 200 times until he was happy with it. And I
yeah,
think you need a little kind of OCD, because I may have a little OCD too, that I can
yeah.
practice for hours one thing just to get it to where
Mhm.
I think it's right. And maybe you have to be a little crazy for that, you know. But you know,
You
I
know,
mean,
and with Hank, you couldn't tell the dirty names. He didn't like that, you know.
oh,
Uh,
he didn't like it.
he accepted those names when it came from Sweets or a very few others. But with coming with me, or you know, he didn't accept. He said, "No, no, you don't say that. You use this word. Do this. Say that. Say that." You know, uh, you know. I
Yeah,
think
I never heard him
the
use
only
the motherfucker
musician.
word or anything like that. No, he just didn't speak like that.
No, he didn't speak like. I have. You know, there is another guy. You thought he was like that, but he was not really like that. That was John Lewis, because with John Lewis you can talk dirty jokes and dirty words. He loved them, you know. He
Uh-huh.
loved them. But with Hank Jones, no. The only guy that I heard, I knew, and I was there, I was Sweets, of course, because Sweets told the told some jokes so funny, that was so funny, and that was so, in a
Body.
way, so eloquent that we accept that, we can accept that,
Yeah, but you know, Hank, I didn't hear him even saying things like, you know, even something like shit or something. I never heard him say anything like that. He never.
No.
He had that churchiness to him, you know, that he was did that kind of thing. But he was, you know, he was very funny, and
Oh yeah,
he,
he was very funny, very, very, very funny, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But you know, and now you also, Benny Carter was another person, though
Oh yeah.
he you could talk a little body with, but you know, but still you wanted to be proper with him. He always exuded so much, you know, these old school gentlemen. They
Yeah,
were, you know, like there was just this feeling of he had such a dignity to you know, to everything that he did. I mean, I saw him one time in Chet Baker and I went to hear him in Belgium one night at a place called Paul's in Brussels.
okay.
And
Brussels, I know this place, yeah.
yeah, you know, and Benny had lived in France for a while, of course, in those days earlier with Coleman Hawkins and Ray Cole, Bill Coleman, and the early first people to really check out Europe. He was among the first to go over there for a little while in the 30s, I think.
That's
So,
right.
so Benny spoke a fairly adequate French, you
That's
know.
right.
Yeah, so there was a guy there, and he's sitting there, and he says to him in French, he says, so vous jouez souvent dans Belgique? Do you play often in Belgium? He says,
Yeah.
oui, you know, quelquefois, sometimes I do, yes. And he said, well, j'ai une boîte proche d'ici, uh, and I have a club pretty close to here, dans une autre
Yeah.
ville, in another town. And est-ce que vous pouvez jouer là, peut-être, la prochaine fois? Maybe you could play here the next time you're in Belgium at my club.
Mhm.
And oui, c'est possible. Then he raises his eyebrow, that thing a little, oui, c'est possible. And the
Yeah.
guy says, well, um, how much are they? He said, oh, Benny says, well, we have to discuss the money. You know, il faut que nous discutons l'argent, les choses,
L'argent.
and l'argent. And the guy says, well, oui, c'est combien vous êtes payé ici? How much are you paid here?
Yeah.
And Benny does the most beautiful take. He raises that eyebrow, which I can't do, but he raises, looks at the guy and says, c'est mon affaire. No, that's my business. No. You know, and just, I think they did make a deal, you know, but the guy understood right away. That was a lesson.
Yeah.
That's what these guys would teach you. Like when Count Basie said that thing about life,
That's right.
You know, when you were around these people, you just watched them to see how they, you know, I learned a lot about playing the saxophone that night, listening to Benny play, but then I learned that too.